Okay. Thanks everyone for coming to the event. We have Josh Pruett here. Josh is a Primetime Emmy and Annie Award nominated writer, best known for his work on Mystery Science Theater 3000, Netflix's The Last Kids on Earth, Crunchyroll's ONYX Equinox, and the original feature for Disney Plus, Phineas and Ferb, the movie Candace Against the Universe. Josh has over a decade of experience as a storyboard artist, writer, and creative consultant for Lego, Warner Animation Group, Pure Imagination Studios, Disney TV, DreamWorks Feature Animation, Nickelodeon, DreamWorks TV, Awesomeness TV, Sprout NBC Universal, Netflix, and Paramount Feature Animation. So let's give a virtual round of applause. I guess it's not going to be a very impressive round of applause because it's just going to be Melinda and I, but we'll give a round of applause for Josh Pruett.
Woohoo! Thanks, everybody. Glad to be here. I'm not sure how much other context kind of Riley has given everybody, but I graduated in 2004 with my master's. I was an undergrad and graduated in 2002. And I think officially speaking, I was the treasurer in the PMC. But at that point, we had almost 100 members. And so there was just a lot to do. My other leadership partners at the time was Justin Ridge and Mike Roush, and they were my roommates and best friends. And Mike is now a partner at Titmouse and head of animation. And Justin Ridge just got done executive producing Resistance, Star Wars Resistance for Disney and Lucasfilm. So yeah, it's pretty crazy because we were literally where you guys are now. So that's one of the reasons that Justin came last year. Fantastic. The three of us actually talk about it a lot. It's something that we enjoy doing. And we've actually come back to Fullerton a couple times to share. So what I wanted to do is, I don't want to bore you guys, so I want to give you like an overview of kind of how I got in, and then like talk about like how I learned how to pitch stuff. I'm gonna share with you how my writing partner Scott Peterson and I pitched our first original novel to Disney. I want to actually show you our pitch materials. And then later on, I'm going to show you an example of an animation pitch Bible that I put together for something that I developed with Disney for I had a couple of really good meetings. I got really close, but I haven't been in and out of development a lot of times. But I just want to show you all like a real example of something that was in professional contention. Like it was up for, I was going to get paid to develop it. And then, I don't want to, like I said, it's like I don't want to just talk all night. Like, the more questions y'all have, the better, because I can get, into the nitty gritty and the specifics. And I want to share as much as I can and, just give all the information that I wish that I had when I was in your shoes. So first, let's do this thing. Technology. It's so fantastic. Hold on a second. All right, can everybody see that okay?
Yeah, looks great.
Okay. Hide sidebar. Oh, that's obnoxious. Hold on. Single page, baby. Great. So this is just to prove that I'm a big geek. So this is me getting an actual win on Failblog. There was a time, that part of your resume where you're supposed to kind of put bonus stuff? So for a couple of years, I actually had I called it special features. But if you typed Epic Win Dad into Google image search, this was the first picture that came up. and it came up for like 7 years. It was totally my claim to fame. So this is me at DreamWorks and my 9-month-old daughter, Katie, and I got a win on Failblog. And there was a time where Failblog, it was like that Icon Has Cheeseburger site. I don't know if you guys know what that is. No, I'm dating myself. But yeah, I got a win on Failblog. It was crazy. And my cousin who lives in Seattle was sitting in her office one day and right before Halloween, and her office mate was like, "Oh, check out this costume. It's so cool." And she turned around and she's like, "That's my cousin." Yeah, so I can't wait until my daughter's like 15 and like I can embarrass her with this. And then this is me the next year. Katie was actually supposed to be like right there, but all this yellow stuff really freaked her out. So anyway, so I'm a geek. I have geek cred. So when and I was born at Fullerton. No. So when I was growing up, I was drawing and I was writing a lot. I kind of thought that I wanted to be a concept designer, like for movies. Like I thought I would get into like visual effects. My dad was super into like Ray Harryhausen movies and monster movies, and he had these magazines. They were like trade periodicals called Cinefex. And this was for the physical effects industry, and there was a special issue they did on this artist named Crash McCreary, and Crash did all the designs for Jurassic Park. He did the Cathoga for this movie called Relic. He helped design a lot of the creatures from Pirates of the Caribbean, but his drawings were just, completely insane. And I was like, oh, I want to do that. I want to design monsters for a living. And then Toy Story came out. Toy Story came out when I was in high school. And I was like, oh, wow. Like, looking at those DVDs, the bonus features, that was like preschool for me. And so I was like, oh man, I want to do that. Like, cause it was a combination of like story and it was a combination of writing and drawing. And it looked like the folks at Pixar, like they actually got to write their material. They weren't just storyboarding. And that really appealed to me. And so I ended up going to Fullerton because they had the entertainment art animation program. So this is like 1999. And like, I think I still have my first email that like Dana Lamb sent back to me and gave me all this great advice. It was killer. So that's like 20 years ago. What the heck, you guys? Anyways, so while I was at Fullerton, like, and I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this, like, I didn't have kind of the chops to get into CalArts and I couldn't afford it. And I needed to go to state and I didn't really know what I was getting into. And one of the things that I loved about Fullerton was the real sense of community there. Was everyone was kind of in a similar position as I was. Everyone had to work, most people around me had to work 2 jobs, at least one job. Like, Mike and Justin didn't, and so I was always jealous of them. But, I was working in the art office. I was working at Save-On up the street. And, I just always felt like our school was known for working hard. And that was a good thing. That was a good reputation that we were starting to build. But the other thing that I was really passionate about was personal work. So when I met Mike and Justin, I started getting involved in the PMC. We were all really doing, there wasn't an official, Mike and Justin kind of invented the film festival. It didn't exist before that. And, people weren't doing a lot of their own stuff. And so a bunch of us, we called ourselves those guys at the time. But we actually got a booth at Comic-Con for like 5 years and started putting our own stuff together. And, we applied for internships like everybody's supposed to do. But I was still working on this personal work in addition to doing our school assignments. So that's really important. That's going to be an important feature of kind of what I want to impart to you all. But it was also the kind of thing that really helped me level up my game when it came to getting work and figuring out where I kind of my position in the industry. So while I was at Fullerton, I did like a 3-week internship at Warner Brothers. They were producing Osmosis Jones had just come out at the time. And I think I worked on 8 Crazy Nights, which was an old 2D feature with Adam Sandler. And the place was like a graveyard. Nobody was there. They were kind of shutting down the feature animation division. But I got to meet Glenn Murakami, who's a producer on Batman, different Batman incarnations while I was there. Justin got to hang out with some of the Warner Brothers animation, like Tony Cervoni, and a couple of those guys. And so it was still a good experience. We had to hand out posters at the wrap party for Osmosis Jones, and they told us we were only allowed to give out one poster at a time. It was such a drag. Like, people did not like us very much. I was like, this is a really crappy gig. But, we're just interns, and then, that looks good on your resume. I was trying to get into DreamWorks feature because they fed you. So the commissary at DreamWorks was free. And so this was I kind of I did my BFA and graduated in 2002. And I just didn't think my work was strong enough yet to get into the job field. And so I stuck around for another 2 years. I did my master's of illustration with Cliff Cramp. And I worked on a personal project that was like development for a horror film. I did storyboards, I did concept design. And part of the reason that I stuck around was I wanted to work on my drawing and painting chops. And I wanted more time to find internships. I tried to apply to DreamWorks 3 years, and I kept getting turned down. And the last semester of my master's, I went ahead and I got an interview at the Donner Company. Richard Donner, who did Goonies and Superman, Lethal Weapon, and his wife, Lauren Schuler Donner, who was producing the X-Men films at the time. And I got the gig. It was in Beverly Hills. And it would have been cool. It would have been amazing to learn from all these people. But, I'd be getting everyone lunch every day. And if I was living obviously in Fullerton at the time, if I was going to drive, up to Fullerton, from Fullerton into Los Angeles, that was going to cost gas money. So I was like, I need to go where they're going to feed me. So I actually used the job offer from Donner Company as leverage. And I called the guy who was in charge of the internship and development at DreamWorks. And I was like, hey, I really want to be with you guys, but I got this offer. I got to tell them today. What do you think? And so that was kind of the first businessy thing that I ever did, kind of as a professional. But I got the gig. I worked in development. I got access to the scripts. I helped. There was something called a weekend read. So whatever movies or pitches are being developed, you had to organize all that stack of material, get it out to all the executives, get it to Jeffrey Katzenberg. And so I got to be a fly on the wall. That was pretty great. And then that turned into a full-time gig that summer. And then in the fall, I worked as a production assistant on Shrek the Third. So it was kind of I'd been working since I was 16, but this was my first, production job. It was really wild. It was a lot of work. I was there when DreamWorks went public. This was in 2000, I think this is still 2004. And it was my job, on the New York Stock Exchange, every company has this giant painting or poster image representing their company. And so it was my job to take this oil painting of Shrek to the Burbank airport and put it on Jeffrey's private plane. And I had to get up at 4 a.m. and grab a utility van from the parking lot. And I was like, I don't know if I should be doing this. I'm just a PA. And so I had to I pulled onto the tarmac at Burbank Airport, and I walked the painting onto the airplane. It was a bizarre job. But I worked in production for 2.5 years. I worked on Over the Hedge. and I worked on B Movie, and I was just getting to know people, and I was trying to understand a little bit about, how the sausage is made. And so I tried to not be obnoxious. I tried to like be a really hard worker and make friends, and then kind of like share that I was an artist and that I had ambitions to be a writer and to be a storyboard artist. And so I would show some people my work and get their feedback. And most of the people were really great about it, but I did make a concerted effort to not, I really took the PA job and coordinator work very seriously. And that was great because I learned how these movies got made. And so while I was there, they had a trainee program, and I was like, oh, this is great, I should apply to this. And when I went and I asked if I could get in, and I'd already been at the company for over a year, they told me I could not take the test. And I was kind of surprised. I didn't understand. I thought, hey, why not give me a shot, But they said they actively discouraged people on the production side from making that transition to the artistic side. So I thought it was really kind of a strange attitude to take. And so I waited for those people to get fired. And a year later, they did. And I asked again. And the new guy who was in there, his name was John Tarnoff, he was like, of course you could take the story test. He's like, and if you do a good job, everyone wins because you already know what it takes to do this job. Like, you're already plugged in. And I was like, that's kind of what I thought. So I got the chance to take the story test. So the way it worked, and this is different from some boarding tests because it's not scripted. So they gave you a prompt. The prompt was, it's an adventure with Gingy and Pinocchio from the Shrek universe. Gingy wants this. Pinocchio wants this. This is the setting. Okay, go. Write something funny and entertaining. And so it was really daunting on the one hand, but it was also literally what I wanted. I was like, this is the job. Like, this is the job I want. Because I always felt like, because I was writing and drawing, and like, little short stories and stuff, it was like, yeah, like, give me all the runway and I will take it. And so I did this storyboard sequence. It was over long, but at this point I had made friends with a lot of the team on Shrek, and so I shared my board with them, and they gave me tips. And in 2006, I got in. I was the first production candidate to ever transition into the artistic side. So yeah, my whole life kind of changed. So while I was an intern and on the production side, I kept doing personal work, right? So like, I was doing comics, I was writing, and my buddy was drawing, Richard Pose, who's on Lower Decks right now, the Star Trek series. I did short stories and self-published them at Comic-Con. For those of you who know Reno 911, Tom Lennon, who does Officer Dangle, the guy in the short shorts, like, he came by and he bought my zombie monologue book, and there's one joke in there, and he actually laughed out loud, but he shelled out the $2 from my book, and I was like, this is the greatest day of my life. And I was doing these short story books. A lot of these short stories you can actually find on, I have a book on Kindle called The Misery Company, and I'll show you guys the cover for it later. But when I submitted my story trainee submission, I had my whole stack of boards, original drawings, and then I had all these comics I had done. I had comics and ash cans and short stories, and it was just like, hey, here's me as a creative person. It wasn't just the portfolio. It's like, here's my resume, my work ethic, and then here's also things that I do in my spare time. This is the kind of person I am. I also, while I was at DreamWorks, I had a short story published in Horror Hound magazine, issue 4, about a guy who unties his belly button. So that's like technically my first published work. So this is the stuff I worked on while I was there. I started on Monsters vs. Aliens. That was my first. Worked on a lot of the Monsters vs. Aliens stuff. I I did some uncredited work on How to Train Your Dragon, the first one, and then got to do some writing and worked on the Croods. So I ended up being there for 5 years. One of the things that was happening is that I would kind of get asked to come in at the beginning of things and the end of things. So like on How to Train Your Dragon, I pitched a bunch of jokes. Um, like there's a great payoff in the movie, um, where Hiccup is talking to his dad, and Stoic says, I guess we needed, all of this, and he's talking about Hiccup. And like that was a payoff that they didn't have in the original movie, and it was one of the things that I suggested because I thought it was a great joke at the beginning of the film that he makes with Gobber. But I also pitched a lot of the stuff with Fish Legs being kind of a Dungeons and Dragons guy. But I was pitching to my heroes like Chris Sanders and Dean DuBois were like some of my idols, especially as a new storyboard artist. So that was kind of a heady time. I also tried pitching a sequel to Monsters vs. Aliens, where Susan is trained by a retired Godzilla. And they were actually going to make that movie for 5 hot seconds. I also pitched some horror stuff for Shrek. But this thing kept happening where like I'd be put on something, but my drawing chops were kind of just so. But they'd always bring me in at the beginning of a movie to come up with ideas and structure pitches and character ideas. And then they'd bring me on at the end, like I did for Dragon, to help punch up jokes and ideas and set pieces. And so like I wasn't always the person who's going to draw them, but I would kind of pitch the idea and people liked my ideas. But technically speaking, I was being paid to be a storyboard artist. And at the time, the studio was kind of moving away from writer drawing storyboard artists and things because of the advent of the Cintiq. Like we started going digital. So Over the Hedge was a movie that was like half hand drawn and half drawn on Cintiq and in Photoshop. So that was like kind of the transition point. So that was like 2005 to 2007. The studio went digital pretty much completely. And most studios were doing that at the time. But they started to be an emphasis on very slick drawing. And it wasn't as important for people to be good writers, good joke writers, good storytellers. So as that was happening, kind of my stock at the company started to go down. And so, like, for instance, there was a bonus feature we did called Bob's Big Break with the Monsters vs. Aliens characters. And I co-wrote the thing with Rob Porter, our director, who's one of a dear friend and a great mentor. And Rob like tried to get me co-writing credit, and the studio said it set a precedent. So that's, again, it's like, this is what Josh does. I keep bouncing up against these ceilings where people are like, no, you can't do that. You can't move, you can't become a story artist. And then I did. And then like, you can't be a writer. So they ended up giving me story artists and additional story material by credit on Bob's Big Break. And then the last thing I worked on that they told me that I wouldn't get story credit on, I finally got my first co-writing credit on How to Train Your Dragon Book of Dragons, which you can watch on Netflix. I think there's like a box set of Dragons material. So it was an interesting ride. I started as an intern, I ended as a writer, and then they didn't pick up my contract. So it was a little bit of a scary period. This is 2011. Is this interesting, everybody? Like, I don't want to. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
it is.
All right. Cool. So something interesting happened. So this is 2011. This is like summer of 2011, and I've got to find a job. I've got a wife and 2 kids at home at this point, and working under contract at DreamWorks was pretty cush, right? They fed you every day, and I hadn't really worried about finding a job in almost 10 years. I was there for 8.5 years. And so it was really my home. And so, it was time for me to kind of get out of the nest. And so I had a friend who knew someone who worked on Turtles. This is like 3 incarnations ago of the Turtles show. And I was a huge fan of Turtles when I was a kid. So I was like, cool, I'll do this story test, right on. So they gave me a audio sample and some script pages, and I did a storyboard sequence. And when I turned it in, the guy hated it. For some reason, he actually felt like I had like spiked the ball on purpose. And like, hand to God, like I had done my best. Like, it's kind of like what I was sharing with you guys before. It's like, my storyboard skills, I've always felt, they're okay. But I always feel like I make up the difference with character and idea and jokes and stuff. But this job didn't need that. This was a script driven show. So they just wanted to see my boarding and drawing chops, and they didn't think they were up to snuff. So I was pretty scared. I was pretty discouraged. But what happened was, at that point, it was a good sample, right? Or at least I felt like it. So I took that sample to the Lego Movie team. They were hiring for the first film, and I got to interview with the animation and co-director on that. And then Phineas and Ferb was also hiring. And so I got to go interview with Dan and Swampy. And I got 2 job offers in the same week off of that failed test. And not only had I never gotten 2 job offers in my life before, but it also taught me that a really important lesson that I want to make sure that I share with y'all is, you can't allow other people to dictate your worth. All I had to do was show that same work to someone else across town, and they loved it. So there's definitely times where and you can show your friends and get good, strong feedback on your work. And you try to get better all the time, but sometimes it's about finding the right fit. A lot of this is very subjective. It's art, right? So it's like you may try to apply for a job or meet people and be like, this is not for me. And the extraordinary thing was I got, double validation in the same week. It was crazy. And the money was the same for both jobs. But I ended up picking Phineas and Ferb because I was going to get writing credit, because Phineas and Ferb was a board-driven show. Lego Movie, I'm sure I would have contributed and had a great time, but I was only going to get credit as a storyboard artist. And so after my experience at DreamWorks, because I was pretty frustrated toward the end of it, because I had material that was getting laughs that people didn't know that it was me. And at some point, I decided that if I was going to have a career, that people needed to know that I was the person who did it. And in my mind, I was making a difference between career and job. I was like, I want to build on success. And joining Phineas was like one of the best decisions that I ever made. The exact same month, I turned some of those short stories into a radio play, which was a great time. And I sold a series to Nickelodeon. So talking about friends and collaborators. So, like I've shared with you about Mike and Justin, we used to pitch each other stuff all the time. And so I wanted to pitch this show to Nickelodeon, and I pitched it to Mike and Justin and some of my other friends, and I got some notes from them. And Mike hated the idea. He hated it. And I was like, really? You hate it? And this is one of my best friends in the world, like who later would, he was one of my groomsmen in my wedding. And I'm like, dude, you hate it? Seriously? He's like, yeah, I hate this idea. He's like, it's so bad. I'm like, okay. And so the next day, I went and I pitched it to Nickelodeon. I went in with 3 ideas. The first idea I pitched them, I had 3 drawings. Drawing of the main character, expression sheet, and then a drawing of the villain. My secret weapon was I had written the show Bible before I went into the meeting. I didn't memorize anything. I just knew my world and my characters. I knew what it was. And so I always get, if I try to memorize stuff, like I don't feel like I'm an actor. Like there's writers who do that. There's creators who do that. They memorize their whole pitch, but I've never been that kind of person, because it always makes me trip up, and then I always worry like if I miss a line, then I've got to try to find my place. And so what I did instead, and this ended up becoming my approach from then on out, is that I knew all the material. I was the expert on my universe and the characters. And so when I went into the room, like right before, I had my Bible in my bag. And so I just sat there in the lobby at Nickelodeon and I reread it and just put it in my bag, and I never took it out in the meeting, but I had answers to every question that she had, and I was able to just kind of like share it with her. And so one of my pieces of kind of pitch advice is try not to think of it like you're selling something. Try, because that puts a lot of pressure on you. It also puts a lot of pressure on the executive, because they're in meetings all day long and they don't want to make someone feel bad as a part of their job. There's very few people that get off on that who work in this industry, especially in animation, right? In animation, most people are really cool people because they like art and drawing, they like cartoons. um, so what I discovered kind of accidentally is that it's much better to just have a chat with someone. And the idea is you're enthusiastic about this idea because it's, it better than anyone else. So I went in there, I did that. I pitched her kind of my two back pocket ideas. And then 2 days later, they called me and they bought my idea, and I developed it there for 2 years. We wrote a pilot script. We wrote a new Bible. That was super cool because when they asked for the Bible, I had already written it. So then I could actually deliver that early, which made me look like a champ. So that was a crazy time. And that was literally right after getting rejected by Turtles and DreamWorks. So it's like I ended up, not getting my contract picked up and getting bad feedback on a story test. And then literally 3 weeks later, I was developing a series at Nickelodeon, and I had joined the highest rated kids series on television. So again, it's like this job, this career is going to have a lot of ups and downs, and your resilience, your ability to be flexible and pivot is part of your survival. And I'm going to share a little bit more about that, because it's really allowed me to kind of stay afloat when things have been really tough and tight. And they are right now. Like literally, I just found out I'm going to be headed back to Disney soon, and I was supposed to start on the 9th, and they just pushed out to the 16th. And I'm very grateful that I'm going to have a job, but it actually puts some pressure on our financial situation. So being able to have other avenues of income and being able to work on things like comics and books and work as storyboard, work as a writer, like the skills that I'm going to walk you through that I developed over time, like they've helped keep me afloat as a creative, as a working professional. Okay. So then I joined Phineas. It was a wild time. Same thing, though, like at DreamWorks, while I was there, I wanted to establish myself and I was trying to be a hard worker. But I also wanted to try to write some of my own stuff, just like I did at DreamWorks. And the way a board-driven show like Phineas worked, I'm sure a lot of you know, but the idea is that we're outline-driven versus script-driven. So, like SpongeBob, like Ren and Stimpy back in the day, we get an outline. It's a 2-person storyboard team. We write and storyboard the entire 11 minutes. And so there's a whole separate writing team headed by Scott Peterson, who would become my friend later on. He didn't like me very much initially. And now he's one of my best friends. But I joined the show and was like, hey, like I was asking the other writer storyboard teams, I was like, do you guys ever pitch your own material to Scott? And they're like, yeah, but it never goes over. So I kind of took that as a challenge. And so one of the things I started doing, I introduced myself to Scott, and I shared some of those radio scripts with him. And it turned out he was a big like horror movie fan. He was actually born on Halloween. And so we kind of bonded over that. And I pitched him Night of the Living Pharmacist, which was the first zombie episode that they ever did. I didn't know that they had been looking for about 4 years to try to come up with a zombie idea they could do. But how do you do zombies at Disney? It's like they just did that musical a couple years ago, but it's pretty light on the scares, right? And so the idea I had, and I remember where I was when I had it, I was sitting in the like lobby of the Sonora building, and I literally wrote it on my phone. I was like, wait a minute. I was like, if everyone turns into Doofenshmirtz, I get two things. I appeal to my boss Dan's ego. He gets to voice every character in the episode. And if everyone transforms into Doof, that's like a zombie. And then we can just do all the zombie cliches of them breaking into houses and all that. I did this concept design poster that's based on the original Night of the Living Dead. But I pitched it to Scott and he loved it. And this is in my spare time. They didn't actually pay me extra for it, but it's fine. But they made the show. For a hot second, it was going to be a DCOM, like a Disney Channel original movie like Candace Against the Universe and Second Dimension. But then they just decided to turn it into an hour special, and that was fine. But it was like the first thing Scott and I got to write together. I found out much, much later that me pitching that show in my spare time, that actually helped me get a job later on. And I'll come back to that. But yeah, it was great. We had a great time. George Romero, who did the Night of the Living Dead series, does a voice on it. It's one of the last things he actually did before he passed away. The guys from Shaun of the Dead have a cameo. It was crazy time. I was on the show like season 4. I got to write and draw. I got to do a scene on the Marvel special with like Spider-Man drinking out of a juice box. It was crazy. So that gig lasted about 18 months. Shortly after that, I went and did a little bit of development at Paramount. And while I was there, I did some writing for the Croods DVD and the Turbo DVD. I also did a short board for Bravest Warriors called Dimension Garden, for their YouTube series. And then Scott called and asked me to come back as a full-time writer for the Alka Files. So at this point, I was really trying to do a lot more writing. And it was really Scott who gave me my first real opportunity. So I was there for 4 to 6 months writing Alka Files, which was so cool. So I transitioned from a storyboard artist into a writer. And while we were there, Nickelodeon passed on my development. It was like John Carpenter's The Thing for kids. So it was like a horror kind of vibe, but it was like for kids. But it was cool. They paid me anyway, developed it for 2 years. Great experience. I learned a lot, but they passed on it. A lot of the things in this industry, you're going to lose a lot more than you win. But the more at-bats you take, your batting average goes up over time. And that's really what this is about. Then came Haunted Mansion. So while Scott and I were working on Alka, he got tapped by Disney to develop the Haunted Mansion. And he actually brought me on board to co-write with him. And we got to develop that for 18 months. They announced us in the Hollywood Reporter, which I'll talk a little bit about. We were developing it as 3 TV movies. We had written the first TV movie script probably 3 or 4 times. But I needed to get a job because Scott was there full time. And I was only really on as a co-writer and consulting producer at the time. So I needed work. So I ended up joining Mr. Peabody and Sherman over at Netflix. I was there for a little over a year, about a year, something like that. So another fun story about story test. Like I did I did a freelance board for them, and the episode ended up never airing. But that work ended up getting me work later on, kind of like the Night Living Pharmacist experience. So like I've used the board that I did for Peabody and Sherman as like a writing sample, like for the last 5 years or so, and it actually helped get me onto Last Kids on Earth. I also got to go to Beijing, which was crazy. I was there for a week. I got to help the team out there with story and kind of pitch them character stuff and kind of things I learned on Phineas. They announced our show in the Hollywood Reporter, which was crazy. Look, it's my name in the Hollywood Reporter. And this is one of those crazy things where, like, you know, my goal is not to be famous. Like, I'm not, and I mean this genuinely. Like, I just want to be able to work, right? I just want a career. I don't need people to know who I am. However, when you get press, when your name gets announced associated with projects, those things float to people like network executives. It lives on IMDb. Like, this stuff starts to collect, and you start to build a reputation, and your reputation is important. And one of the things that I noticed is that, as a storyboard artist, like, people don't really know who you are unless you're a director. And one of the things that I discovered, it was like, I really like writing. I think I'm better at it than a storyboard artist. And I realized that, maybe this was my path, because I was getting so much more work on that side of things, and things were kind of building on success. And where the storyboard experiences were, I was kind of fumbling through it a little bit more. And so this really crystallized for me that I think I was headed in the right direction. It's more like the recognition I was getting as a writer was far eclipsing the recognition that I was getting as a storyboard artist. So I was trying to listen to those instincts as they came up. So I can talk more about this later. But the brief version is Scott and I ended up getting fired from Haunted Mansion. The director that they selected ended up kind of going behind our back and getting us removed from the project. And then that director and his team, they got removed from the project. They tried 3 different versions of the script. None of them got announced. Not one of them got announced. Nobody even made it to boards. And so I needed to find work. So it was totally heartbreaking. At some point, I realized that all of my heroes, people like Jim Cameron and Tim Burton, Robert Rodriguez, Guillermo del Toro, they all have horror stories about being fired off of things that they loved, that they really invested in. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do this for a living, like, this is what it's going to be. There's times where I'm going to get jacked, and it's part of the gig. And so they kind of showed Scott and I the door, and we found out literally that same week that Dan Povenmire and Swampy Marsh were gearing up Milo Murphy's Law, and apparently he had already asked for us, and he thought that we were doing Haunted Mansion because they hadn't told anybody that they had let us go. And so we just walked over to Dan's office, and we were like, so we heard you might be looking for some writers. And I kind of was ballsy, and I said, hey, I would love to be a writer on this show. Like, I don't want to be a storyboard artist, because they were moving to scripted. I was like, I don't want to be a storyboard artist. I want to be a writer. And I found out 6 months later, this is the thing I mentioned earlier, that the only reason Dan said yes, he liked my work on Phineas, fine. But the reason Dan said yes was because of Night of Living Pharmacists. Because in my spare time, I had pitched something original and cool that he really liked, that ended up being what he considers one of our stronger episodes of the series. And that's how I got this job. So it's like, if I hadn't stuck my neck out at DreamWorks, like, and waited for those people to get fired, I would never have been a storyboard artist. If I hadn't kept trying to pitch stuff, I never would have gotten the writing credit there. If I hadn't have, kind of told the Turtles people to shine on and kept showing my stuff around, I wouldn't have gotten the job offer from Phineas and Lego Movie. If I had listened to Mike, I would not have sold my show to Nickelodeon. So, you have to have some confidence in your own work. And some of that's a healthy amount of ego. But in my experience, it's also like a healthy amount of delusion. This is a dream, right? To make a living like this. And, very few people get rich doing it. I certainly have not gotten rich doing it, but I've made a living doing it. And I think that's a privilege. But it requires you to really, you've got to really love this, and you got to work your tail off. And so every time I've done that and extended myself, almost every time, something good has happened. Sometimes it takes a little while for it to manifest, but it does come around. So joining Milo was wild. We got to do I'm actually in the opening sequence. I don't know if anyone's actually seen the show, but in the opening sequence, my writing partner Scott, like, he's the story editor on it, and so he plays a character named Scott the Undergrounder. He's in the opening sequence, and like 5 or 10 seconds before that, there's actually a character that's modeled on me that's on the rooftop on the right side of the screen. And so, like, that was the first time I was ever in an opening sequence. It was crazy, you guys. So then something totally insane happened. So I'm sure a lot of people have told you guys, it's who you know, and you got to make connections and all of that. And my experience, I've always been really allergic to this idea of like, like schmoozing and networking. Like, I think the cool way to do it is you just make friends. Like Jim Cameron, who did Aliens and Avatar and Terminator, he came to speak at DreamWorks one time. And one of the pieces of advice he threw out was like, look, he's like, if you're ever on a movie if you're working on a film, he's like, you're a PA, whatever. He's like, don't try to take the director to lunch. He's like, that's a waste of your energy. He's like, what you need to do is think laterally. He's like, the coordinator on this show, the supervisor on this show, the beginning animator over here, you all are coming up at the same time. He said, that's your generation. He's like, those are the people who are actually going to be finding you jobs, not the guy who's 10 or 15 years ahead of you, right? And I found that largely to be the case. And so on Phineas, one of our animatic editors, she and I bonded over a love for Mystery Science Theater 3000, which was one of my favorite shows. When she had like a poster in her office, and we bonded over that. And it turned out that she was friends with Jonah Ray. And at this time, this is like 2015, Jonah, who's a comedian, he had a show on the Meltdown and stuff. And he was helping Joel Hodgson relaunch Mystery Science Theater. And Lauren texted me one day and was like, hey, they're looking for someone to storyboard the new opening, but they need a fan to do it because they don't have any money. And I was like, okay. So I sent her a link to my portfolio website. Always have your portfolio website. Always build it this weekend. Doesn't matter if it sucks, just build it. Because I would not have had time to build it, because at that point I was writing full time, right? So I had some work up there, but it wasn't super recent, but it was there. I put there's animatics and stuff up there that I uploaded. But she was like, yeah, Joel Hodgson is looking at your storyboard portfolio right now. And I'm like, okay. So then I get this email from Joel. And like, this guy's literally one of my heroes. And he's saying, yeah, we need some storyboard help. Would you be interested in that? And like, it was crazy. It was crazy pants. So I got to work on the relaunch of the show. I storyboarded Jonah's origin, and there was like no money. It was a joke, but because of it, I asked Joel. I got to meet one of my heroes, which was nuts. I mean, literally, you guys. I was like, I have drawings that I did when I was like 12 years old of Crow and Tom from the series. But I was like, hey, like, since I'm doing this kind of at a reduced rate, like, could I also write on one of the episodes? So I actually got to write riffs for Mystery Science Theater. And like, if you had told 12-year-old Josh that that was going to happen, I mean, and this is literally coming off of a year of writing dialogue for Weird Al Yankovic on Milo Murphy's Law. I only got to meet Al like one time, but you guys, like, all these things build on each other. Like, and again, it's like, it's only because Lauren and I were friends and we bonded over a Mystery Science Theater, right? It wasn't networking. It was like, oh no, this is something we have in common, so Lauren and I are friends, so we're buddies. So yeah, totally amazing experience. Yeah, total dream, bucket list, right? So while Haunted Mansion, so I'm about wrapped up, and then we're gonna get into the meaty stuff. Okay, everybody good still? Okay. Scott and I had this plan where we wanted to do those Haunted Mansion specials, and we wanted to do like a Harry Potter series of books for each special. And we were going to do books in between each special. We were really ambitious, but we actually sat down. We had a couple of meetings with the franchise and the publishing folk. And I actually went into Photoshop. So this is another thing that I want to like make sure I hit home today is like I used what I could do to leverage what I wanted to do. So like on Mystery Science, like I I I I would not have been asked to write on that show just because they needed my storyboard skills, right? At a reduced rate, Joel needed my help. And I was like happy to do it. But I leveraged that opportunity into the writing opportunity so that then I had another writing credit, right? So I can build on that success. So when we were pitching Haunted Mansion, these Haunted Mansion books, I actually made like fake covers for this stuff. Like I made a fake box set in Photoshop because we had tracked out. I think there were 6 books that we wanted to do, and we got this close to doing them. Man, it would have been so kick-ass. There was like a whole battle for the mansion. Oh man, it was going to be amazing. So when that all went away, we got an opportunity to do adapt Jon Favreau's Jungle Book movie, the script, into a book. And so we split up the script in half. Every scene became one chapter. I had written those short stories that I had showed you guys. And I had written a novel or 2 at this point that hadn't been published. But because of that, I kind of had the confidence to jump in with both feet. So Scott got offered this and he was like, I don't know if I have time to do it. Like, what if me and Josh do it together? And I was like, yeah, dude, let's do it. And they went for it. We split the money. It wasn't very much. I think it was like $5,000 each. But what we did was we then rewrote each other. So I wrote the front, he wrote the back, we flipped it. Then we rewrote each other and we found that we could write that way. It was different because on Phineas and Milo, Scott was my supervisor, right, as story editor. But this, we were kind of more on the same level. And so we helped each other out. It went over really well. Since Haunted Mansion didn't go anywhere, we were like, oh, maybe down the road we can pitch something original. And that's where our original middle grade came from. So during this time, I got nominated for an Emmy Award for my work on Phineas and Ferb, and that's my wife Amanda. And we got to go to the Emmys, which was crazy town. And on Milo, I got nominated for an episode called The Island of the Lost Dakotas. So I got nominated for writing for that. And again, it's like this writing thing that I think I do better, like I seem to be headed in this direction. Like whenever I chase this direction, I find a lot more satisfaction. I like it more, and I'm able to build on success. I took all those books, those short stories, and I combined them into the Misery Company. So that's actually on Kindle right now for like $3. And after that, joined Scott on The Last Kids on Earth, which is on Netflix right now. One of the best jobs I've ever had. And got to co-write Candace Against the Universe. I also have a show that I wrote on for Crunchyroll, ONYX EQUINOX, that Riley mentioned. That's coming to Crunchyroll November 21st. So everyone should check that out. It's super fucked up. It's like a really violent but very dramatic and heartfelt anime, like Mesoamerican mythology. Our showrunner Sophia, like it's, you know, we tried to be really conscientious about Aztec and Maya mythologies and be respectful of those cultures. But it's also like really cool and exciting. There's a lot of heart in it, so I would recommend everybody go check that out. And there's lots of monsters and also cursing. So the book that we pitched after Jungle Book was called Shipwreckers. We pitched them like 2 or 3 original ideas, and this is the one they went with. It took years to kind of, it only took us a couple of months to actually write the thing, but it took years for it to release. The idea is it's as if Indiana Jones was an idiot and if Short Round was doing all the work. And it has a ridiculously long title that used to be longer. It used to be, Or We Nearly Died a Lot, but the people who work in marketing and the cover folks were like, we can't do it, it's too long. So they trimmed it. But for 5 hot seconds, it was like a selection at Kids Book Hangout last year. That was pretty wild. You know, we haven't really sold a lot of these yet. We haven't what's called broke even. That's where you earn back your book advance and whatever marketing they've spent. But it was a super cool experience. Scott and I did the same thing. We actually applied what we knew about story structure from television. And so we broke out the whole story like it was a feature. We used giant cork boards like the one behind me, and we carted out the whole story, all the character arcs. And then same thing, once that outline was done, we split it up. I wrote the front, he wrote the back. We switched and then punched up each other's jokes. I also did a Dragons pop-up. This is an old cover, but I did an Avatar book called The Legacy of the Fire Nation that has made some people cry on Goodreads, so that's kind of dope. I also got to do some comics for Toy Story 4 and for Onward. Last summer, I did some development with Lego, which was pretty sweet. I pitched them an idea that had to do with bugs, and for 3 months that was actually in consideration, which was very exciting. So that's all of that stuff. So this would be a good place to do a little bit of questions, I think, because what I want to share next, everybody see me in my double chin? What I want to do next is I want to show everyone what Scott and I use to sell Shipwreckers. And we'll talk about that. I want to walk you through that whole thing. And then I want to talk about, I want to show you that pitch Bible example if we have time. But I think now would be a really good space to do some questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much for all that, Josh. Finish. So yeah, I see that Garnet has her hand up, so I'll let her ask the first question.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for everything that you've been sharing. It's been so awesome to hear your journey. Something that I keep hearing that you've been saying is this idea of like leveraging, like you leveraged that internship with DreamWorks saying like, hey, I got this opportunity over there, but I want to be here, leveraging the like, oh, I'm a storyboarder, but I want to be a writer and like you kind of need me. So like, but like like that concept is very new to me. Like, how do you suggest we do that? Like, is that something that you can only do once you've got like stuff under your belt? Is that something that students should do like at all? Like, are there moments where you're kind of like, ooh, this, like, are you like paying attention? Like, yeah, these are the moments when I can do it. Just like, I don't know if you can elaborate on that, to any advice that you can give us. Because I think that's a really cool concept of like making that opportunity for yourself and sticking your neck out and being like, I can do this. I just need to kind of like push the door a little.
Yeah. That's a great question, Garnet. Like, I think, like, certainly it's a timing thing, and it's you're looking for your window, right? I would say that, like, in a more umbrella approach, is like you take the things that you're good at.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, one of the things that they're going to want to do in general is, pigeonhole you and say, oh, you're this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually really good, especially since if you can do it first. So one of the things, this is a funky example, but I always think about David Bowie, Alice Cooper, Lady Gaga as people who understood how art and commerce and the business of music and media were going to try to box them.
Mm-hmm.
And so they literally, as part of their identity, was that they weren't boxable. They designed themselves, and they would constantly redesign who they were. And so I've always admired those kinds of artists. And, like, Bowie did it, Madonna did it. Like, I'm just using those examples because they're very clear. But one of the best things, it's confusing to talk to somebody and go, oh, I'm a storyboard artist, also a writer and a composer.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you are those things, people get confused. And the reality is, like, they're looking at 10 people for, let's say, a job. And for the first chunk of your career, you want to be a one thing, and you've got something in your back pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it was like, okay, I want to be a storyboard artist. I want to be a storyboard artist. I want to be a storyboard artist. So, like, I had those other writing samples and stuff when I turned in my trainee portfolio, but those were like an addendum, right? It was like bonus features.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that part of what you're trying to do is, it's like being the good version of an opportunist.
Mm-hmm.
So you spend years establishing yourself as X. Let's say you're going to be a background painter. So you've got kick-ass background paintings. So you can jump in and you can be a layout artist. You can be a background painter, feature or television. You can be color designer, right? So there's a gamut of things, but it's very specific. So then what you do is, once you're established, once you have your second gig, your first gig, that's when you start working on personal stuff. So that's when you start expanding what you can do. So it's like, no one told me to do those comics on the side.
Yeah.
No, like, nobody told me to pitch DreamWorks development.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just wanted to. I pitched them features while I was there. I wanted the experience. I again, I was deluded enough that maybe I could get something going, right? But because of that, like, then I was introduced to those people and I got to know those people. But it was only once I was kind of in the door that I started to diversify. So I think that my personal opinion is that's the track, is you establish yourself in one area so that people start hiring you. Because what happens is that like people will look at my resume because it says Disney.
Mm-hmm.
So the work that I do for for larger companies, that buys me a certain amount of credence. So it buys me, like, street cred. And so when I try to do other things, or I try to, sell maybe something original, like, they might look at it more, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, that was a factor certainly when Joel was looking at my stuff, and like even in the art of that they did and the Kickstarter campaign, like they talked about, me being an artist for Phineas and Ferb, because that actually helped the Kickstarter campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And like Steven Sugar was a part of it too, like he did designs. And so they talked about him coming from that show. So like I would say big picture, that's what it's about. It's about, you establish yourself in one area, be kick-ass, be an awesome person, and then you're like, oh, by the way, right? Like, oh, by the way, I also do this. Because what happens when you lead the other way, people get turned off.
What, when you say quote unquote the other way, what do you mean?
Like if you go in there guns blazing and you're like, I'm a background artist and I'm also a writer, they don't know what to do with you.
Oh, I
Number
see.
one, they don't like, if we're just talking about jobs, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then what happens is, like, if you do it the other way though, like then they're like, oh man, like Garnet, like I can depend on them to do this stuff for me, that rules. And then they get to know you, and then you're like, oh, by the way, like I do this other stuff like for fun, and they're like, oh my god,
Mm-hmm.
like that's like, it's an opportunity to kind of impress people.
Yeah.
And I think the leverage thing is like, and I'm going to talk a little more about this with Shipwreckers. It's like, I put a trailer together for Shipwreckers using my storyboarding Toon Boom skills.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know After Effects, I didn't know video stuff really, but I faked it in Toon Boom because I knew that. I had experience with that. So it's like, if you're, for instance, if you're going to go in and pitch a show, right? Like if you're a character designer, lead with that. Lead with kick-ass character designs, and only do, a little bit of writing, right? So you kind of, you lead with your big guns. And then you let the other stuff be like bonus
Mm-hmm.
features. And then as far as like kind of being opportunistic, like I just stuck my neck out for that job thing. Because he could have said no, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was just being honest, and they needed to fill a position, and he gave me a shot, which is great. But I didn't, it's like I already had the good interview with them, like I knew I was in contention for the job. um does that answer your question? Does that help?
Yes, it does. It really does. And I think that especially, I mean, I know that that's definitely applicable to me, because I know that for me, I like character design and I also like storyboarding. And I know that I've gotten the advice many, many times that it's like, pick one, like when you're starting,
Yeah.
and if you want to move around later, that's totally fine. Um, so, but I think it's great to hear kind of like the expanded version of that, as to like why it works like that and why it's better to do that, as opposed to I'm going to give you like both of these at once, and then people are going to look at you like, I don't know what to do. So that was very helpful. Thank you so much for your
Yeah,
answer.
sure. Totally.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. So there's one in the chat right here. Not being in the industry, how do you get the opportunity to pitch to a studio?
Okay, great question. So unless you really feel ready, and you've done your pitch bible, you've done your designs, the stuff is slick, you don't have to do a lot of artwork. Sometimes they do want artwork, sometimes they don't. I've always found that some artwork really helps because we're talking about animation. Show it to your friends, get some good feedback. Nickelodeon and DreamWorks over the last couple years have, they've started like shorts programs and competitions. Like, I think those are a really great entrance, a really great entryway. I think if you're on the outside looking in, I think it's a lot harder for them to take you seriously unless, now here's the trick. So you can try to get contact information from some of these executives, right? But unless you've got something that really sings and that is ready to go, okay? Like, it needs to be personal. So it needs to come from personal experience. If you're an artist of color, that's going to help a little bit these days, for sure. If you're a female creator, that's going to help these days, for sure. However, the best advice that I could give you for pitching is to make stuff and show it to people. So when I was talking about like that lateral networking thing, so like, okay, so behind the scenes, so I only know a couple of folks personally who worked on Owl House, but one of the stories I heard is that they put this great presentation together. They had character designs, they had a script, and the deciders, the executives, they didn't really care for the script. But what the creator had done ahead of time is that without permission, she had just boarded the pilot because her experience was as a storyboard artist and a director. So that was, she knew that world. And so she boarded most of the pilot and showed it to the deciders, showed it to the executives, and they greenlit the show. If she hadn't have done that in her spare time, that show would not be on the air right now. The two shows that I saw Dan Povenmire sell, so he's got a new show that they just announced, and then I saw him do the pilot for Milo. Dan just did the board. Like, he had a development deal where there was a script and all this stuff, and like Dan comes out of directing. So it's like he directed on a Family Guy. He's done all kinds of stuff. He just boarded the first 7 minutes of Milo Murphy. And that's what sold them. The new show that they just announced called Hamster and Gretel, it was the same thing. He pitched them verbally what it was supposed to be. He shared a little bit of artwork and some concept design and like a little bit of written material. And they were like, oh, it's pretty good. And then he showed them an 8-minute reel that he had done. They didn't know he did it. And they're like, oh, let's maybe do that show. Like, that's literally what happened. So I feel like you getting together with friends to make stuff. If you've got friends who can make music, if you've got friends in the acting program or people who do voices, do an animatic. Like, just do a short. Like, that's the straightest line to getting some of these folks' attention. Because everything else ends up being this. Everything else is like a lot of conversation. Disney and all these studios, they spend a lot of money talking about stuff. That's what development is. And most of the success stories and most of the shows that are on the air that I either have friends on the show or know personally, like, they got on because of the animatic. Like, it was just, the show was done. Then it became a question of like, do you like that show or not? Do you want to make that or something else? So it's like, if you've got something that you think is cool, like, make it and put it on YouTube, put it on Vimeo, and start sending it out to people. Put it in film competitions, like short film festivals. There's hundreds of them. But like I swear that is the best tack. Because for me, even in my experience, it's like when I was pitching, it's like she was only interested in my pitches because I was coming from feature, right? So like that gave me street cred for that pitch. And, you know, I only got that meeting through a friend. You know, on the outside, one of the things that you could do is like, other than making stuff and showing it to people, I think this is my other event. You're going to hear me evangelize. Like, this is the best pitching tool ever. Like, all of these places, we're in something right now that I teach a class at CUG Master Academy. It's an online course about development. And in there, I talk about we're in something called the intellectual property wars right now. And so you've got these giant megalithic corporations. Warner Brothers has the DC universe, all the Harry Potter stuff. Marvel has now the Fox library. They've got Marvel, right? And then all the Disney stuff. The only reason Disney bought Fox was for the intellectual property rights, because they've got all those action movies, you know, 100 years of action movies from Fox, and then they've got, you know, Aliens and Predator. They've got all these things they can exploit. It's just about content. It's just about intellectual property, okay? So when all those places have now been bought up, all these other studios, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for books, comics, graphic novels. They're looking for short films. You know, I think like 2 years ago, I remember going to the theater, and I was sitting in the theater with my kids, my family, and there were like 5 movie trailers. And all of them were based on children's books or novels. All of them. Before COVID, when I was going into Disney and I was pitching ideas for shows and stuff, you know, they had a stack like, you know, this on their desk of like, you know, pitches and pitch Bibles. But literally their floor was covered in books, middle grade books, young reader books, YA books, comics, because anything that's pre-existing somehow has more cachet. It's just the way it is. And something that's original is considered a greater risk. So, for instance, like Last Kids on Earth. Last Kids on Earth is based on a giant New York Times best-selling series. And Scott and I were, after working on that with Atomic Cartoons, the sweater I'm wearing right now, we had a window where we were going to develop Shipwreckers with them. And there's some legal issues with Disney because technically they own the property. But after that kind of passed, hopefully we'll get to circle back to it. But, you know, we wanted to pitch them more original material. But what they said is they wanted us to go out and find other books that we might be interested in adapting. Because based on their market research and where they put their money, it's more worth their time to find something that already exists that they can buy the rights and exploit those rights. So one of the other tracks that I'm always trying to tell people is like, for instance, like this is what I learned when I sold this thing to Nickelodeon, is that they own the rights like forever. The only way I could get them back is if I pay them both for what they paid me plus a percentage of what the development executive was being paid. So right now it's kind of a bummer because I think I could turn that into a pretty great book. And so now what I'm more interested in doing is pitching original material to publishers to try to get some more graphic novels and original middle grade books off the ground. Just to give you a quick example, and then we're going to move on so I can share more stuff with you. But see if I can do this. Like, if J.K. Rowling had sold Harry Potter to Warner Brothers as a screenplay, they would have bought the screenplay for about $50,000 and they would have owned it forever. So instead, she went through the 100 plus rejections, and Harry Potter turned into this giant megalithic cottage industry that continues to make billions and billions of dollars. And again, it's not necessarily about the money. What it's about is the creative control. So on Last Kids, we worked with Max Brallier, the author. Because he started as a book, he still holds on to all of the print rights, and he gets a royalty on every book sold. It's a totally separate contract. But because he created Last Kids, think of it as buckets of rights. He also has TV rights, movie rights, marketing, toys, video games, right? So if he had just taken that to Netflix, Netflix would just own the whole thing, right? But because it's pre-existing, because it exists as a book first, he's able to take those rights and go pursue like the live action TV rights. And then they put a Netflix sticker on the books, and then they look into getting translations in every single country that Netflix series appears in. So one of the things that I talk about that I think is so important as creatives is to strategize. So if you've got a cool idea, think about whether it could also be, or first be, a short film, or a comic, or a radio play, a podcast, or a book. Because if you get the opportunity to pitch something somewhere, you have all those rights now, because there's pre-existing material. So my actual advice to you is don't rush off to pitch to the studio. Like, obviously, if you get in the door as an intern or a production assistant and you have a chance to meet some of the executives, like, go pitch for the experience, like, absolutely. But be aware of how to strategize your creative career. And it's not about being precious with your ideas. My whole thing is like, hey, we're all creators here. We're going to have hundreds of ideas, and our first 10 are not even going to be as good as our next 30. But be like, right now as students, like, make stuff and show it to people, get it going. The woman who was showrunning She-Ra, whose name escapes me, like, she came out of college with like a whole graphic novel that she had done. It was like her, like, senior project, and like she sold as a graphic novel first, and then it ended up getting, it's called Nimona, and it ended up getting movie rights. The movie rights sold, but she was also making money off of the book, and then that led to other writing jobs, and then that led to her producing jobs. So I think it's important that we start thinking that way as creators. We can do Kimberly's question real quick. That's fine.
So my question is, because you talked about publishing, I think it's a comic first. I'm actually working on a comic to post on Webtoons and Tapas. Does that count?
So much so, yes.
Awesome.
And then make sure you hold on to the print rights.
Right, print rights, got it.
So if you've
I'll
signed
make a note of that.
Yeah, if you've signed anything, like, just make sure you hold on to the print rights. Because that way, once you've got a year worth of stuff, then you can either self-pub, Kickstarter, or look into, like, IDW and First Second, stuff like that.
You also have another question in the Q&A chat. Would you prefer that we answer that now, or would you like to continue on your presentation and then we could circle back?
Let's do the question right now.
Alrighty, so one of our anonymous attendees is asking, were there ever times when you felt discouraged? And if so, how did you overcome it?
I get discouraged all the time. I think this summer was really brutal. I think this year has been brutal for everybody. But I've had lots of times where I've been discouraged. I think the thing that exercise really helps me. I'm not great at it, and it's not my favorite thing in the world. But walking and jogging, I've found, helps me come up with new ideas. And so if I get passed up for a lot of jobs, or like things aren't going my way, like there's a certain amount of self-maintenance that I try to make sure that I'm attaining, because I think our health and our attitude and our mental space, like that's really a major factor about how to keep encouraged, because this does require so much work and thought and brain power and stamina. One of the things that I've always done is, like, I call it going back to the well, is like, watching those old movies, TV shows, those books, those comics that got you into this in the first place. So like Army of Darkness was like a giant influence on me, Evil Dead. I love John Carpenter movies. I love comics. Like I said, I love Mystery Science Theater. Halloween's one of my favorite movies. And so when things are looking kind of bleak, like I will go back and kind of fill the well with all that stuff that I love. Also, I've found that, keeping in contact with friends, it's a great reality check. And I think especially this year, it's really easy to get and feel isolated. And it's easy to forget to reach out. But that's been a lifesaver for me personally. And then on the career side, it's really the diversification that has allowed me to stay encouraged. So like, for instance, so the job that hopefully I'm rolling into soon, I knew about that job like a year ago, and I kind of had to fill the blanks to wait for that to open up. So it's like I couldn't really wait. So, I had to reach back out to like all the people I've worked with over the last 10 years, freelance. But what I was able to do is like email people on the book side, on the freelance boarding side, on the comic side, on the feature side. And so that diversification has just allowed me to have just more chances at bat. So like what I did is I had like a little cork board, and I put Post-its on it of like all the places I reached out to and all the friends that I kind of reached out to. And at one point I had like over 20 of these things up. And now that this job has finally manifested, like almost all of those things have completely dissolved, which is like the nature of the beast. Is like you reach out, you find out what the opportunities are, you have a meeting. Sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say later. But I've discovered that having multiple irons in the fire, that's how you stay encouraged. So if I had just been shooting for one thing at one time, or only had one thing going, that those times of my life are when it hit me the hardest. But like having multiple irons in the fire, that's how I've been able to stay not just afloat, like I mentioned, but like to stay encouraged, to stay excited. One story I would love to share really quick. I'm a huge Doctor Who fan. And I love the old series, I love the new series. And there are these things called Big Finish audios. And they're like full-on audio productions featuring a lot of the doctors from even the modern series and back in the classic series, and the stuff is quality. Like this production company kind of kept Doctor Who alive during the time when the series was off the air. And so I've been, kind of obsessed with them. And that radio show that I mentioned earlier was like inspired by listening to these Big Finish Doctor Who audio productions. And so just like at DreamWorks, I tried like 3 or 4 times to enter, and I was already a working professional at this point, but I tried to enter short story competitions that they were having, and I entered 4 different times. And I, through that, became friendly on Twitter with some of the actual Big Finish Doctor Who writers. And one of them, her icon, her profile pic was a character from Phineas and Ferb. And so we ended up becoming friendly on Twitter as like a mutual admiration society. Like I loved what she was doing in the Doctor Who universe, and her kids watch Phineas and Ferb, and so we would just chat about that. And a couple of years ago, there was an open call for Doctor Who book authors, and at this point, Shipwreckers was on its way out, and I had done Jungle Book, so I tried to put this package together, and I asked her if she could put a recommendation in for me, and she did, but nothing came of it. And then this summer, I got an email from her saying that she's producing, for the first time, she's producing a brand new box set with one of the original Doctors from the 1980s. And she wants me to write a script for one of these audio adventures. And I started crying when I read the email. And you guys, like, never in my life, like, would I have thought. And, this is like, I love Mystery Science, like, like crazy stuff has already happened in my career. But this is like beyond. This is major bucket list. And just like Mystery Science, it's going to be top of my resume, the least amount I've ever been paid as a professional. And I've actually got a synopsis. It's due tomorrow. And so I've been beating myself up about it all day, and it's been so tough. Because guys, it's Doctor Who. It's got to be so good. But like none of that would have happened if I hadn't have, tried to apply so many times, and then was able to connect with one of these writers online. That opportunity would never have happened. So it's like, you try stuff, you stick your neck out there and you try things. It's so important. It's so important, and it will open up things that you never dreamed would have happened. But yeah, you've got to get yourself out there and kind of take risks. All right. So what I want to do really quick is I want to walk you through, this is more important than the other thing, actually. So let's just focus on this, and then I'll do more questions because I know people are going to want to go. I don't want to keep everybody too late. Okay, so Scott and I just did Jungle Book, and we want to pitch originals. These are the same editors from Jungle Book, and we pitched them 3 ideas, and this is one of the ideas. They liked it, and so we put a pitch together. So at this point, I had already had that experience at Nickelodeon. Scott had already been in development, quite a bit, because he's about 10 years older than I am, and he has more experience. But we were like, hey, like, let's leverage our animation experience toward trying to get this book going. And so that's what we did. So we put this pitch packet together. So I went into Photoshop. I did this like janky design. Oh, actually, and I want to show you guys really quick. So you see this logo I did? So the happy face guy thing, right? Okay, hold on. I don't even know if you guys can see it. If you look at his shirt, it's the same design, right? But if you look at the Disney did their own version of my logo here. But the artist, he got my pitch packet first. So if you look inside the illustrations, Brian did my goofy logo. Anyway, but like it was just my attempt to like part of the branding. I was like, oh hey, this is cool. Let's try to think like they think, right? Because Disney's the largest entertainment company in the world, and they're gonna brand this. They're gonna come up with something. And so part of my initial thought and strategy with Scott is it's just like the Haunted Mansion books. They're gonna do this anyway. So let's do it for them, because if we show them something that's halfway decent, then maybe it will be cool, right? Maybe it will be good. So whenever you're pitching something, your job is to make your executive or your editor's job easier. Because usually when they're pitching to their boss, that's where this elevator pitch concept comes from, that term. They just have 5 minutes with their boss and they're going to go, yeah, I got this book pitch today and it's about this and this and this and this. So if you provide the editor or your executive or both with a good elevator pitch, you've just increased the chances of your idea making it to the next step. So that's how I always look at it, is that my job is to help make the executive's job easier, because they're the ones who's going to sell it behind closed doors when I'm not there. So this document is to help make our editor's job easy. So we wrote an adventure up the Amazon full of booby-trapped ruins, feral creatures, ancient evil, piloted by an idiot who won't stop making jokes, as seen through the eyes of his more than capable young sidekicks. That's it. That's the book. If you don't like that, stop reading. If you like that, there's more. Okay? Lots of white on the page. Kept it very simple and easy to read. It's Indiana Jones from the point of view of Short Round. We're pitching it again, right? So this is that thing you guys have all heard, which is tell them you're going to tell them, then tell them that you told them, right? So this document is about that. Imagine if your guide on the Jungle Cruise had to defend you from real wild animals and cannibals. Things would get deadly, hilarious, quickly. We're just restating the same thing. Different language and different touchstone. Shipwreckers is Indiana Jones if Indy were Bruce Campbell from Army of Darkness, or Kurt Russell from Big Trouble in Little China. Which means what? It means he's a funny idiot with delusions of grandeur. Short Round would be the real hero, often forced to save his own neck and the captain's. Again, we're restating our thesis. Who's the captain? Captain Kevin is the Jungle Boat captain who's constantly throwing out bad puns and cheesy shtick. It becomes clear he is covering for inadequacies with humor. He makes hippo jokes to hide that he's terrified of hippos. He's out for himself 100%, to the point where he believes no good deed goes unpunished. Clear, right? Simple. Clear and simple. That's what you're shooting for with these. What's the setup? What's the point of this thing? Captain Kevin has been hired to lead a tour of people up the Amazon, but he couldn't care less about their experience. For Kevin, the trip is an excuse to look for treasure. So when disaster strikes and 95% of his passengers are kidnapped or stranded, he sees that as a plus. Now he's free to focus on his treasure hunt. The only problem, the only thing in his way, conflict, is now there are 2 kids still left on board. So we set up who this guy is, what he wants, and then we set up what the conflict is. Okay? The kids are Danny and Mike, our brother and sister, stranded in the middle of Brazil with a crazed boat captain. Danny, 8, is like a little Han Solo. All she wants is excitement and adventure. Mike, Momo, 12, is the practical one. He's responsible for his little sister and just wants to find their parents and get home. While Danny needs to learn responsibility, Mike could benefit by learning to lighten up and have a little fun along the way. So we set up the journey of these characters. So who they are, she's Han Solo, he's the practical one. What does she want? She wants excitement and adventure, right? What does she need? She needs to learn responsibility. Mike wants to find their parents and get home. What does he need? He needs to lighten up and have fun. So we establish that dynamic right away. Oops. The adventure. All of that is just set up for the real adventure since our mismatched threesome are alone on the river. Explosions, idols, this is all bullshit. We're just talking about something that's fun, but we're selling the thing that we want to write. Heart-pounding action, etc. It's kooky pants. As they progress, Captain Kevin reluctantly realizes that he needs these kids. They serve not only as the angel and devil on his shoulders, Mike and Danny respectively, but a moral compass to steer him in the right direction. Ultimately, they give up what they want in order to do the right thing, stop the bad guys, and save the day. They survive to live and explore another day. Pretty generic, right? Very generic, simple setup, but that's the kind of clarity, and certainly that's in the Disney milieu. That's the kind of movies that and stories that Disney tells. It's appropriate for the brand, right? The marketplace, we wanted to talk a little bit about the marketplace. We didn't know as much about it, but again, we're trying to make our editor's job easy. Shipwreckers is Indiana Jones meets Diary of a Wimpy Kid, or it's Phineas and Ferb meets Maze Runner. It's the classic Jungle Cruise humor mixed with actual adventure. So now this is kind of our pitch. This is kind of our appeal, our creative appeal. There's a lack or a dearth of true comedy in kids' books. We want to fill that need. The series would be the true action comedy book that we were searching for when we were 8-year-olds that our kids are looking for today. This book is aimed specifically at 8 to 10-year-olds because that's when you're not yet old enough to watch the fun PG-13 action blockbusters. But everything else seems like kid stuff. Middle grade falls right in that space. And in general, not enough of it is actually funny. These would be Big Brother funny, and sometimes even Uncle funny. Folks tend to overlook that Star Wars, A New Hope and Empire, and Indiana Jones are funny and big adventure. These days, middle grade books and kids movies, especially kids TV, tend to be either silly or serious. This series aims to bring fun, so danger plus comedy equals fun, and real entertainment to a group of kids who need it. Why we're excited. It's a chance to write real jokes, laughers, and groaners that aren't found in middle grade kids' books, aren't allowed on TV, and are shunned by most adults. It's adventure with tongue planted firmly in cheek. Shipwreckers would be like the old pulps, but kid-friendly. Bigger-than-life characters, strange locations, danger, and intrigue. Like the best family entertainment, we're shooting for something inclusive, not exclusive. From our years on Phineas and Ferb, wink, wink, we know how to reach kids and their parents with the same material. These books could be shared from kid to mom and dad and back again. Big adventure, big jokes, a series of popcorn movies in prose. 3 pages, that's it. That was the pitch. We gave them that. We gave them 2 sample chapters. Now, again, this is a little bit different. Usually in publishing, you have to have the completed manuscript. But because this was our whole strategy, because we had already written Jungle Book, and Jungle Book had done pretty well for a novelization, we could go to them with pitch materials and sample chapters. In a normal circumstance, in the book I'm trying to sell right now, that's out to market with my agent, it's the full manuscript is already written. Most of the time, you've got to have the whole thing done. The only exception these days are graphic novels. It helps if the whole thing is at least penciled. But if you have the first 25 pages and an outline or script for where you're headed, that's usually how people are selling graphic novels these days, even people who've never done them before. So there's one other little fun thing that we did. So remember when I talked about, leveraging your talent set, leveraging your abilities. So we had that pitch packet, we had 2 sample chapters, but we wanted something else. So I put together a trailer. And it looks like this. So I had my friend Lauren help me record some music. My buddy Martin Olson, who's a writer on Phineas, but also did the voice of Marceline's dad on Adventure Time. He did the narration, and this is what we gave them.
From Joshua Pruett and Scott Peterson, the 2 guys who wrote the weirder episodes of Phineas and Ferb, and adapted the movie based on a movie, based on a book, back into a book, and who will eventually write this, and hopefully this too, invite you to the literary event of 2017. Sometimes adventure forgets to wear pants.
Ta-da! So imagine kind of retroactively, all that finished artwork, that's just, I just used, like I dropped in the finished stuff from the book when it was over. I put that there. But all of the artwork and stuff in the original version of that trailer was just what you saw in the pitch packet, right? The design that I did, the logo that I did in Photoshop. I don't know how to do, like I said, After Effects. So I I just built each of those frames in Photoshop and like did the lens flare so it looks like it's a legit lens flare, even though it's not. It's just an image. And again, this is just using Toon Boom. So I'm not that savvy of an editor, but I knew Toon Boom because I had worked on Phineas and worked on Sherman and Peabody and stuff. So I understood that enough. So when she took all those materials to what's called a P&L meeting, a profit and loss meeting. So she's sitting with marketing people, her bosses, she's sitting with the entire team, the publishing team. She had that trailer, and we actually, for fun, we called her, left a message pretending to be her bosses, and we talked about how great our book was. So she actually took that message and she played it in the meeting. We didn't know she was going to do this, but part of what you're trying to do, and this applies to job interviews, this applies to pitching shows, and certainly pitching books. Part of what you're trying to do is sell yourself. You're trying to like introduce yourself. You're trying to pitch to them that, you know, your personality, your sensibilities, that you're a professional, that you're going to finish this thing. You know, part of the challenge when you're pitching a series is that yes, this company is going to put $70 million, you know, in your hands to produce a series. Like these stakes are pretty big when it comes to television, right? So that's why it's so arduous sometimes to get through that process. But even when it came to this publishing opportunity, Scott and I weren't going to let anything kind of go to chance. So we got creative. So I think that's what you really need to do when you're trying to get something to the marketplace, or you're trying to convince someone to publish or make your work. So that really paid off for us. Like I said, like Shipwreckers has not really sold that great. Like they didn't do really much of a marketing push at all. But I can tell you that the best thing ever is that there's this interesting inverse relationship between working in giant media like television and then doing publishing or even self-pub. So in television, so you're going to get paid, which is awesome, but there is a lot of people between you and your desired audience, right? When it comes to publishing, there's not a lot of money or financial benefit, but there's only 2 or 3 people between you and your desired audience. So there was very little editing, there was very little tampering on Shipwreckers. Shipwreckers is almost 100% what came out of Scott and I's head. And when you're talking about television, like that's been filtered by producers, directors, executives, editors, censorship boards, standards and practices, marketing, like there are so many people involved in that. But the trade-off is that you get paid well for your time. On the publishing side or the self-publishing side, there's not much money to speak of, but you get full access to your audience. There's very few obstacles between you and your desired reader. So the beautiful part on Shipwreckers is that is the book that we wanted to write. The book we wanted to write got published. And one of my favorite things is a buddy of mine from high school, his daughter, she got in trouble for reading Shipwreckers in class like this. Like she had Shipwreckers like under the desk when she was supposed to be doing something else, which is like literally like the greatest compliment that I think Scott and I could ever get. I wish it was a giant hit, and we certainly want to do more. But that's probably one of the best creative experiences that I've ever had because of that inverse relationship. All right, more Q&A.
Cool. Okay, so this one's from Samantha Lee. When studios decide to buy your pitch ideas, how do you internalize the concept of letting go creative control of your ideas to studios?
That's a really good question. I want to say that it kind of back to what I was talking about having multiple irons in the fire. Like obviously you're pitching something that you feel really passionate about, and this is like one of your babies, but hopefully it's one of your babies. Like I would not pitch your baby. Like I said, I don't want you to be precious, because I think if you're too precious with your ideas, it leads you down this kind of darker path. Like the Sith. It leads you down this darker path where like you get paranoid, or you don't pitch it to your friends to get feedback, or you think the studio's gonna rip you off or whatever, right? And that's just you chasing your tail. Okay. Ideas are a dime a dozen. It really is about execution. That's why the you part of it, that's why the personal story part of it is so vital, because you are bringing you to the table. Not they're buying you, not just the idea. They want your sensibilities. So certainly there's a discipline involved in understanding that, okay, this is kind of going to be theirs, like in success, it's kind of going to be their show. And like if you get to a place where they're weighing in, like they're going to produce the show, they're spending all the money, so they've got a lot of skin in the game. So I think having a healthy amount of perspective about what you want out of the experience, I think that's key. One of the things that's really helped me, even just as a working professional and understanding that I was giving people ideas all the time as a writer, is like, they're using you, they're renting your ability. But you are also getting something back. So not only are you getting paid, but you get the benefit of that street cred, like I was talking about before. So I've seen other creatives and other directors I've worked with in the past where the only thing they've got going is that day job with that studio. And I've found that those folks end up being like not a lot of fun to work with, because everything's riding on this one experience. So if you don't have any other creative outlet, and you are relying on the studio to kind of be your guiding light on your project, I think that could end up going really poorly. Like, Scott and I were really all in on Haunted Mansion before it kind of blew up. But I was doing other stuff too. He and I were already starting to talk about books. So part of it is you want other things, other irons in the fire to insulate yourself so that you don't become so precious and like so guarded. Because the other positive effect of that is that you become more flexible. So if you're in a studio system, they're going to have notes. They're going to want it to move this way. They're going to want it, brown and yellow, and you want it green. Like, it's a very natural and expected part of the process. But if you are flexible, I think you can navigate that success so much better. I think that's why it's so important, before you get into a place where you're pitching things and you're trying to sell shows, that you have professional experience, because that way then you've got something to compare it to. The handful of folks that I've worked or talked to who, sold something so quickly, like, it doesn't always work out very well for them. Or they get burned out, or they get soured on the experience, or they kind of walk away from being that sort of creative or creative producer forever because it was such a bad experience. So it's like the folks I've seen who've been the most successful seem to be the most flexible. And, like Dan is one of the best bosses I've ever had. He's very confident in what he brings to the table. But because of that, like, I can pitch him anything I want. And he's not threatened by me. He doesn't care. And I remember working with directors at DreamWorks where, like, they were so insecure. They were so worried about what the studio was doing with their movie that, they just insulted people and everyone else was wrong. And so the whole crew was miserable. They were miserable. And I was always, even as a PA, I remember sitting in these meetings going, like, your name is going to be on this poster anyway. Like, why do you have to micromanage everything? Like, and then like I said, on the flip side, it's like some of the most fun I've ever had are with filmmakers and directors and creators who are so flexible. Like, it's very inclusive. Everyone is a part of the solution. And then the stuff gets better. Like, it's this really funky thing where it's like, it's counterintuitive. It's kind of like what I was talking about in that inverse relationship. It's like, the more protective you get, the worse it is. The more flexible you become, the better it is. Does that answer your question? Hopefully.
We have another question in the Q&A box that is asking, how does payment/salary work in publishing?
Okay, great question. So this is the way it works. So if you're doing development for a studio, or if you've sold a book, it's done in chunks, and they are based on steps of things that you're actually accomplishing. So one of the things to remember is that if you do sell something, they're probably not going to give you a development deal. You will not be there full time. They will pay you anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000 for the rights to the thing, and for you to write a Bible and co-write or write the script. The way your contract will be broken out Awesome, Samantha. The way your contract is broken out is you get paid a little upfront, and that's going to be taxed, and you have to give some to a representative if you have a percentage for a representative. Then you get paid a little bit for the first half of the Bible. Then you get paid a little bit for the next chunk of the Bible, etc. Publishing works the same way. So you get paid a little bit on signing your contract. Then you get paid for the first draft. Then you get paid for a revised draft or a final draft. And some places like Insight Editions, like they didn't even finish paying me my advance until the book hit shelves. And it was something that I didn't think about at the time, and I wish I had. And I didn't get paid very much for the Avatar book anyway, especially considering the amount of work that it was. But like that's one of the things why it's useful to have a literary agent or a lawyer help you look at these things so you know what you're getting into. But as far as your expectations go, if you sell a graphic novel, these days it's between $10,000 and probably $30,000. You'll probably get like 5 or 10 up front. And then you probably won't see any money until you deliver a first draft, like pencils probably, or inks even. And then you revise that and you'll get paid again. So it's like, you can't necessarily make a living off of that, but if you already have a job that, and you're young, right? Like that's part of why I want to impart that to you all right now, is if you're making things right now, after you're working and after you're done with your schoolwork, like, you've got years where you can start to accumulate work and be making material so that by the time you're ready, you can get a job and then take that material. You can use that material as a portfolio piece. You can use that to pitch. You can use that to try and sell a graphic novel project or a middle grade book. I'm trying to do right now, and I have friends who've done NaNoWriMo, which is the National November Novel Writing Month. And people try to write a novel in 30 days. It's like writing 1,700 words a day. And there are professionals who do it, for comic book projects where they try to do a certain amount of pages a day. There are people who write full novels in that amount of time. Victoria Ying. Yep. She and I we're not super close, but we're friendly. And she's been on her Twitter, she's been sharing a lot of really cool tips about nano, really inspiring stuff if you're interested in doing that. Does that as good contract? Yeah, okay. Cool.
I see Garnet has another question, so.
Yeah, sure.
You should be able to unmute now, Garnet.
Oh, hi again.
Hey.
I just got like a billion questions as we started talking about like creative ideas and then like the publishing, and I was like, whoa, wait, I think I started with one question and then I ended up with like 20. I think though, kind of, I don't know if you would have an answer to this, and if you don't, it's totally fine. But I guess like that idea of letting go the creative idea, like when you're pitching to a studio, how does that work if you have like a published comic or like a web comic? Because earlier, and I don't know, maybe I confused something along the way, but earlier you said that like if you've got something on the table, if you've got something that's already out, then like you can have like more of the rights.
Mm-hmm.
So in my head, I'm kind of like, wait, how does that work? If you pitch it to the studio, will they still get to change it? Will they be more loyal to your idea because it's already set in, quote unquote, set in some kind of stone? Like how does that work?
So it depends on the producers and the filmmakers who are attached to it to help you. Assuming you're even attached, there's some there are some authors and creators who don't want to be involved. Like on Last Kids, Max was able to turn it into an executive producer job for him, and our show won an Emmy, which is super cool. The short answer to your question, though, so here's the thing: if it's already published, the beauty part is you've already told your version. You can always go and tell anybody, yeah, the book was better. That's literally where that came from.
True.
So the way this works is that some studios will try to buy all the media rights. And if you have a good lawyer, what you'll do is you'll just say no. You'll say you get the episodic TV rights and you get some of the marketing, merchandising, and that's it. And so when it came to Max and Last Kids, he had a separate deal set up with Atomic Cartoons. And so they were partners on Last Kids. But all it meant was they were producing it together. They were co-owners in the TV episodic rights of Last Kids.
Mm-hmm.
So Max still had the publishing rights. He had a previous contract with Viking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he held on to live action feature and feature animation rights, among others. So the beauty part is he always has the books. He gets to keep making books. It has nothing to do with Netflix or Atomic Cartoons. It is totally separate.
Mm-hmm.
But if he had tried to write it as a pilot, holding on to those rights would be almost impossible. And there is no real legal reason why that's the case. That's just the precedent that has been set over the last 50, 60, 70 years.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is like once you get into that room, hopefully you are working with wonderful creative collaborators who want to hold on to the essence of your story,
mm-hmm.
but then expand it and add to it like we did on Last Kids. We added character things and we added some emotional depth that they didn't have the space for in 300 pages. And the best case scenario is you having already told your story and you are able to protect the remaining rights.
Mm-hmm.
And you just tell Disney that, yeah, you guys can have episodic TV and I'm a consulting producer on the show. Or you just say, yeah, you're going to pay me for those rights. And you're going to pay me if the show, as the show reaches certain milestones, and God love you and good luck. And then you just go make other books.
Yeah.
Like there's a guy I met who I'm friendly with who did a children's book called, his name's Drew Daywalt. And he did a book called The Day the Crayons Came Home, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And he started out wanting to be a horror filmmaker. He's actually written stuff, I think, for Blumhouse. Hopefully that's coming out next year. But he and I met through some mutual friends. And he was telling me that Sony and that one of the producers of Stranger Things, they're in development on a feature. And because he knows that world, they were like, hey, why don't you come and, write the script and do whatever. And he's like, you know what? He's like, God love you. He's like, you guys have fun. I'm going to go write more children's books because it's way more fun. I love it. And I don't want to get involved in those shenanigans. So, a lot of people don't want to. A lot of people don't want to do that. They just want to make stuff. And so like that, it just, your options increase when you're talking about something that's already existed in another media.
Got it. Yeah, thank you so much for that answer. That definitely clears things up.
Right on.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I'm not seeing any more questions. I'll give it a second or two just in case because I don't want to miss anything. But that might just about wrap it up for the night.
Okay.
Otherwise.
And
yeah.
And if no one else has anything else, Garnet, you're allowed to ask more stuff.
Yes, you definitely are. If you have more questions, feel free to keep talking.
Oh boy. Oh man, I didn't. Because I have so many, I guess, like insider questions, but I don't know if I'm allowed to ask those. Because again, as a student, there's like all the inner workings of the industry sometimes, and like I guess I have like technical questions like how do lawyers work and stuff, like because all of that is important. And then knowing that you have like again like the like even the concept of a lawyer to be able to say like no, like you're going to be able to keep these rights, like that's a whole new world for me. So I'm like, tell me more.
Yeah, it's I think I didn't worry about that until I sold my first pitch.
Mm-hmm.
So until that, like I had already been in the industry for almost 10 years. I didn't think and I would suggest the same for you. I would not worry about getting a lawyer until you're talking about intellectual property,
Got it.
because that's when they protect your rights. So usually a lawyer will, they'll charge you either a fee, a flat fee, which can be quite a bit of money, or a percentage of what you're making.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be anywhere from 3 to 15%. A manager will take 15. My literary agent takes 15. Agents take between 7 and 12. And that's off of the gross. That's not after taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So, generally speaking, when you're talking about how much you make on a project, if you have any sort of representation plus taxes, usually the rule of thumb is that means you're taking home about half of whatever it is that you're being offered. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, a lawyer is great when you are selling intellectual property. That's when you want that kind of representation. A manager is much more like a career coach, and an agent usually is the person who's out trying to find you work or help close the deal, and then they pass on the contract to your lawyer. Some people have both, some people have all three, some people have none. There's exceptions to all those rules, but my suggestion is if you get to a place where you are going to sell something, you want a lawyer.
Got it. Do you have, I know, oh my gosh, who was it? Was it Kimberly, I think, that brought up like webtoons and stuff like that?
Yeah.
I don't know if you know anything about that world, because I know that that's a little more new and recent, but I don't know if that, like, if like it requires like the same thing, like
I would just look at the contract.
the contract.
Like the thing to try to remember is, you don't want to give everything away for free.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to pay you, then you make sure that their license for your work is limited. For instance, if they're going to actually give you money, yeah, it's cool if the stuff lives up there for 2 years. If they're not going to pay you, then okay, cool. Yeah, you guys can have web rights to my material for a year. And then at that point, we renegotiate. Like, it really all just comes down to you want to hold on to your rights.
Got it.
And that's in any set of circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I've definitely heard that more and more. As I am a student who's going more, like I had my first conversation about someone who like wanted me to do like a freelancing gig, and everybody was like contracts, and I'm like, I've never done a contract before, and then I just keep hearing that over and over again about like protect your rights, like have the time that they're going to be able to use your thing, what they're going to be able to use specifically, and for how long and stuff like that. So I keep hearing that word, and I'm like, that's important.
Yeah, definitely. And it will become less foreign kind of as you go. And in an emergency, there's stuff like, LegalZoom, and they've got great resources where they can walk you through a standard contract. You can look stuff up on there just for general research. Usually at the studio level, like contracts, being exclusive, right? You just want limits to that exclusivity. Sometimes when you're working at a major studio, Like they want to own all your stuff.
Mm.
So you want to do something called a carve out. And that carve out document is all the stuff you've been developing before you started working at that place. And that's how you protect yourself. Because a place like Disney, they will, because they're Disney, they will automatically say, well, we just own anything you think of while you're here. And you say,
I've definitely seen that before.
and you say, no. You say, you are paying me to contribute to that show. And here are all the things that I already have going that you have no jurisdiction over. So I've had to do that at multiple studios.
Got it. Okay. Well, I mean, I don't think I have any more questions. So if we want to close things out,
Anybody
totally
else?
fine with that.
Yeah, you got it, Gurnet.
Yeah, no, but thank you again so much for this. It's been super insightful.
My pleasure. Also, oh yeah, by the way, if you guys have any other questions, and Samantha, I see you. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to harass me on my Twitter, which is @ZombieTardis. So like I will say for the record, like I can't look at stuff because that puts me in a funky legal situation. But if you are just looking for advice, or if you're looking for tips or tricks or stuff like that, like, you know, feel free to bug me over there for sure. Yeah, you bet.
Perfect. And I did see that Samantha Reyes had their hand up. I'm not
saw
sure
that too. Samantha,
if they
are
still
you
have a
there?
question. I'll allow them to talk in case.
Hello.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, Joshua. Thank you
Hey.
for sharing your inspiring journey. I love storyboarding and writing as well.
Cool.
What are a few creative exercises that you do to practice both crafts? You may just pick one if the other, if both are too much.
Yeah, great. That's super great question. Dean Dubois threw out one that I totally recommend, and my buddy Mike did this actually in college. It really helped him. Like taking a scene from a movie or a feature, animated feature or a show, anything that you really love, and studying it, redrawing it. So either as thumbnails or, you know, full straight up storyboards. But Dean talked about a couple times when he would share with the story artist on campus, he talked about boarding the scene in Blade Runner where Rutger Hauer's character finally confronts Harrison Ford on the rooftops. And he said it really helped him understand filmmaking. So it's like he turned off the sound and he went through shot by shot and he just thumbnailed it. So he understood the rhythms of that sequence. And he said that really helped open up his head to the filmmaking part of storyboarding. That's one of the things I think that's so not misleading, but like storyboarding is a really tough job because it's a couple jobs combined. So it's one part filmmaking, but it's also layout. It's sometimes writing. It's sometimes designing, depending on what stage of the show you're actually in. But there's a lot of elements to being a storyboard artist. And so one of the things that's useful about an exercise like that is that it's starting to isolate the filmmaking part that you're trying to develop as a storyboard artist. So I would definitely say I would do studies from live action more than I would from animation, because I think as a rule of thumb, you want to be the kind of artist the kind of storyboard artist who brings other things to animation. You know, like one of the things that makes Acura so influential so many years later is that, you know, there's influences from like silent cinema from like, you know, the 20s and the turn of the century in Acura. and like Otomo is pulling from all kinds of filmmaking traditions, not just animation. And it's like Tezuka, or not Tezuka, the guy who did Astro Boy, like he was pulling from Disney and then filtered that through manga, and then oh right, thank you, yeah, it is Tezuka, okay, I didn't screw it up, thanks Ludwig. But like that, like you pulling different influences into animation, like that makes it better. Like then it's not so incestuous, right? Because certainly when I was at Fullerton, Incredibles and Brad Bird was like the greatest thing. Iron Giant, so fantastic. But like Iron Giant, like he's so influenced by live action, he brings that to the table. So in my class that I mentioned, like I have students pick like their 25 classics, and they pick like their 5 favorite live action movies. So it's like, instead of me saying like draw from John Carpenter's The Thing and Kurosawa, because I love those, like you should draw from things you love. Like if Elf is one of your favorite movies, Jon Favreau is an excellent director and a very good visual filmmaker. So if you go back and you draw a sequence, like that's going to give you insight into how that sequence is put together. Because one of the things that's unique about storyboarding is that that's actually what the job is. Like you aren't usually storyboarding a whole anything. Your job is to make this one little piece work really well. So that's what I would do, is I would, when you're watching something that you love, or you're trying to chill out during the insane times that we're living in, watch an episode of television, a show that you love, and then go back and pick a scene and thumbnail that scene. And then as far as writing exercises go, there's lots of things you could try, like, short stories, or like I talked about, like that NaNoWriMo thing, right? Where it's like you're trying to write a certain amount of words every day. One of the things that I try to tell people is like, try to identify a half hour or an hour a day to whatever creative endeavor that you're trying to do. Because it's really easy to procrastinate, and we can talk ourselves out of stuff. Or like, I love video games just like anyone, and I love watching TV, but like sometimes at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, I got to work on that new script, or I want to work on that new book. And I'm beat, I've got a family, I've got 2 kids. But I try to put in, a half hour here or an hour here. Jane Espenson, who's a screenwriter, John August, there's other novelists on Twitter who I follow. They'll do these cool things called writer sprints. Well, they'll turn off the internet, and they'll do as much as they can in 60 minutes. And that's a great exercise, because I've discovered over the years, especially as a full-time writer, you'd be amazed what you can get done in an hour of concentrated work. And it's easy to get distracted in this day and age, right? But that's what I would look into as far as writing exercises go. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you so much. I won't forget this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Anyone else have anything? Everybody good? Everyone ready to take on the world? Yeah.
Everyone's ready to go get jobs.
Let's go get let's go make stuff, dudes.
Exactly.
My dudes, go make things. Yeah. Go make things, my dudes.
Thank you so much. One of the things that I really taken away from tonight was just the prevalence of making your own luck. I think a lot of the industry is like finding luck and finding connections, and a lot of that is very scary because it's not something you can control. But a lot of the stories that you told were very involved in putting in the extra mile to make sure that your voice is heard. And that was something very inspiring that I took
Oh,
away.
dude, I'm glad. I'm super
Yeah.
glad. Yeah. I mean, like, there are so many folks online, and I know a lot of you already follow them, but like, you know, people doing web comics and people posting things online, like, it's an amazing way to build an audience. You know, it's legit now. It's not secondary. It's not less than. And that's a great way to get your voice out and start practicing this. So yeah, man, yeah, look, make our own luck. That's what we got to do.
Yes, thank you so much for coming and speaking with us tonight. It was very helpful, and it was wonderful just hearing about your experiences, and all the Q&A that you answered was very helpful, and there's so much to take away from it.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thanks, Melinda. Thanks for having me, you guys.
Thank you so much. I think I'm going to end the webinar here.
All right, everybody, way to go. Get out there, kick some butt.
All right.
Go
Thank
Titans.
you. Have a great rest of your night, everyone.
All right, good night, guys.
Good night.